So sometime in the spring, summer of '68, the RFQ shows up on the street. Right. And it lands on my desk. And I'm reading through it, and all kinds of stuff that are in my memos are in this RFQ. The error control mechanism I had described in my memos, the actual picture was in the RFQ. And I'm thinking, that's pretty impressive, you know? It hadn't dawned on me at that time that I would be involved in anything to do with it, because I figured at that time I was getting ready to go back to MIT. I hadn't quite been out the 2 years, and bottom line was that, good, someone's going to build this net. That, I mean, to me, the work that I had done was about as practical as I thought I needed to get to go back and be a mathematician. So Frank Hart shows up in my office one day, and he says, I understand you've got the DARPA RFQ. Can I take a look at it? Who are you? Was my question. He said, well, he's interested in Frank Hart, and he runs a group. They like to build this sort of stuff. Well, fine. We started to chat, and one thing led to another, and Frank decided he wanted to put in a bid for the ARPANET. Except I ended up writing the proposal. He said, you know, which help us put it together. So I actually put together the technical part of the proposal. Severo Ornstein, who was one of Frank's people, was a really good hardware designer. And a lot of what this proposal was about was describing what we would actually build. Mm-hmm. So the software part of it you could sort of describe in terms of what had to happen. I mean, you didn't need to give them the lines of code. But if you're going to create hardware, you needed to actually state what you would build. And so Severo and I remember closeted ourselves over at his house one day, and he said, well, what does this have to do? And I said, well, you know, it's got to take this DLE thing, detect it, then look for a sync character, and he's designing the hardware right on the spot while I'm describing what it has to do, which was a kind of an on-the-spot tutorial. I mean, it's like a PhD program in hardware design right on the spot, because I'm seeing ideas in my head suddenly turning into
hardware design.
Hardware, right in front of my eyes. I'm thinking, this guy is really terrific. What Severo was basically doing was designing the interfaces for the Honeywell machines.
Got
so
it.
that
Okay.
They could take stuff off the Bell modems, take stuff in from the host computers, and doing it sort of in real time with me. Frank's big issue there was he wanted to be sure it wouldn't break if you dropped it from a truck, so he ended up getting these ruggedized units that were big as refrigerators and heavier than a tank. In fact, Severo was commenting on everything else I was writing, so he was sort of the surrogate for Frank to make sure that what I was writing made sense, because Severo could understand that sort of stuff, and it really worked out very well. That's what became the technical proposal that went into DARPA. The effort to actually create the ARPANET design was actually a very intense intellectual activity. I mean, in many ways, the packet radio program, which we'll get to later, was a much more complicated development because it had so many other attributes to it. But because this was the first effort, it's sort of like the first missile that you send up, you know, or first rocket into space. I mean, you don't know if it's going to work or survive, and it may be very primitive by comparison, but because it's the first one, intellectually it had more risk to it, because we didn't know whether it would really work as planned or not. And the spec that came out from DARPA for this network, you know, talked about half-a-second end-to-end delays in the net. It talked about the need to take in packets and deliver them reliably to the other end, but it was not a spec on how to build it. So that's the contribution I really made, was how would you take this basic idea, this specification, and make it into something real? Figure out what the strategy was.